The Joe Rogan Experience.
I was born into a cult, a high control group that I didn't know to call a cult because, I was born there.
You were a child. Yeah.
That was my whole experience. My grandfather started in 1931. So my mother was also born into the cult in the 1940s. My dad was, let's just say he was 12 when he first met my grandfather, who would later become his father-in-law, and my grandfather became his father figure. So my mom was married off to this man who was a follower of her father, and I am the second child of their union.
Wow.
And
Where'd all this take place?
So this took place, that he originally started it near LA in Pasadena, which most people know because of the Rose Parade and other things like that. When he first started it started, my understanding is he was a Boy Scout leader. And he was an orphan. He had come from Oklahoma when he was a young man. And the Boy Scouts didn't allow him to have as much control as he wanted to have over the boys.
Oh, boy.
So, which is a lot of control. So he left the Boy Scouts and he took the boys with him. And some of the boys from his original troop in 1931 stayed with him past his death. One of the first boys took over after him in the late 1980s.
Wow.
Or the early 1980s, actually. Yeah, so he was really good at getting followers.
What was his background? Like, what did he do before he did all this?
Nothing.
Nothing.
He was I don't think he graduated from high school. I don't know that for sure. He lied about everything. And he said he had a PhD from Stanford later when he it wasn't until I got to college I thought, no, I'm not even 100% sure he knew how to read, to be quite honest.
Really?
He came from a family where he was the only child that lived out of his particular mother, who was married to a man. It was a second marriage, and his first wife had died, and then he had a bunch of kids or whatever. So he had a bunch of half-siblings, but no full siblings. And apparently, now this could be lore too, they kind of excommunicated him. He compared himself to Joseph, like of the multicolored clothing and everything. So he was like put down a well, he liked to say, and he escaped and he came to L.A. In the height of, the silent films, things like that. He said he was in silent films. There's no chance that is true, but he said he was, and he got some sort of probably church education when he got here, and he declared to everyone he was the prophet of God. He was going to live 500 years, and he was going to lead the army of God in the second coming.
Wow. And that's your grandpa.
That's my grandpa. It certainly is.
Oh, my God.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
You can't pick your grandpa.
No, you can't.
No.
But it was a male organization for a very long time. It was all men, and it wasn't until...
All men?
All men. It was all men. It was from 1931 to 1966 when my mom married my father. No one was allowed to get married there. And they were all presumably celibate, and it was just men.
Oh, my God. Presumably.
Yeah, presumably.
It's like prison.
Yeah,
They're gay for this day.
Absolutely. So I was raised by a bunch of older men who had never been with a woman.
Oh, my God.
See how well that ended. And but he didn't want his daughter to be an old maid, and she was getting older. She was 24 by the time he married her off to my dad. And at that point, I think the women, like his wife said, it was their fourth child. They had 3 boys first. And so this was his first daughter. And he decided that since the world had not yet ended, that maybe he should marry her off before she either became an old maid or maybe a loose woman. Who knows?
When did he think the world was going to end?
Well, he used to prophesy in 1977.
Want some more fire?
Sure, I'd love some fire.
I'll keep this over here if you want. It's easy to use.
Thank
Just
you.
push that thing down.
Where I come from, this is a grave sin, by the way.
Oh, a woman smoking a cigar or anyone?
Anyone smoking
Anyone?
a cigar.
Are you allowed to
Especially
drink
a woman.
coffee?
Yes.
What was the rules?
Well, coffee is interesting because I don't know that they said out loud you could drink coffee, but I don't remember it being forbidden. That the body is the temple of God, and that there's no marking your body with ink, no piercing your ear. I know. I have a lot of ink myself. I wasn't sure if I should show it off. And
No piercing in the ears.
Right, no piercing the ears.
What about makeup?
No makeup when I was young. They also unusually cut off women's hair, at least during the era that I was there. Now, there was
Cut it off like a boy's hair?
Yes. Mm-hmm. My mom had the exact same haircut since she got married until she died. The exact same haircut. She died in 2022. Yeah, so just a lot of the femininity was considered a temptation to the boys. And since it was supposed to be, they thought it was better to, burn in hell than to lust after a woman. And they quoted some stuff from Paul, in the Apostles and the epistles, and that basically you could get married as opposed to lust. And so eventually in the 1960s, they allowed their first wedding, which is 35 years. Think about that. 35 years of celibacy of all, just a bunch of dudes.
Wow.
Mm-hmm. So I went to lunch a couple days ago with someone I hadn't seen since I was 3. And so a lot of fellow former field members have come out of the woodwork since
We
this
should
book
tell her,
came
right?
out.
Field is the
Yes.
name of the group.
Yes, we called ourselves the Fields. And one of these former members, who I won't name, I hadn't seen. I didn't recognize him at all. I just hadn't seen him since I was a little kid. But several of them have come out who knew my parents and, of course, knew my grandfather before I was born, and then maybe knew me when I was a little teeny girl, and they have lots of stories. Anyway, he was on one of these things we called the Trip with a capital T. And what we did on the trip, there were different things in different years, but this one was in the early 1970s. And he was, doing all the things you do on the trip. But one thing they required, which my father required of us at home, too, is to run every morning. First thing in the morning, which you can say there's some good things about this, but you slept together in tents, and then you'd get up and you'd run, and you'd have to beat your time. And my father used to time us as a kid. So, I had to beat my time every day, which is really hard to do, of course, because at some point you're not going to be able to beat your time, right? You can't always get better. But at this point, he was 19, and he was beating the time, he said, in that time was it in relation to the fastest runner. And so if the fastest guy was going really, fast, you had to keep the same ratio of distance. So anyway, he didn't make his time. There were 3 guys who didn't make their time, and they had to go through the SWAT machine. So my grandpa often made boys go through the SWAT machine. And the simple version, which was done at the actual location of the field, was you'd crawl through the other boys or men's legs, and every boy would spank you. I know.
Oh, my God.
I know. They're little... Well, we won't even get into all the things you could think about that. But there was a different version that was only done when the boys were separated from their parents. And so when they would go on these trips, and my dad was the original driver. He started driving by the time he was 18. He was driving all around the country, taking my grandfather's boys. So again, my father was not his son. He was just some dude who joined to this cult. And my father would drive these boys around, and he would time them when they ran and did all those things. And so in this particular case, they did SWAT machine where you have to hold on to a fence pole and you face the fence, and then all the guys come and they hit you. So they're not just spanking you, but they're hitting you. And so he was getting kidney punches and all this stuff. And he was saying he fell to his knees, and he almost died. He was so bruised up, and he did not want anyone to know this story. He hasn't spoken of it because he's so ashamed that potentially someone might think, why didn't you fight back? And of course I said, but you were trained you trained that you deserved this,
Yeah.
And then apparently one of my uncles, was really worried, wanted to take him to the hospital, but couldn't or didn't because they had no insurance. And this young man, who's no longer a young man, said that, he could never tell his parents. He never to this day ever told his parents or anyone. He and his brother have never spoken of their time in the fields. It is like this big taboo. He got out maybe a year later, but he was... that was only one of many, many, many stories he told me. But that one just really struck me to feel ashamed of that. I guess for many years, I too did not tell people where I came from because you feel like you must have done something weak to be a follower. And that's just not true. If someone gets a hold of you as a child, they can program you to think almost anything, especially if they're good at it.
Yeah, unquestionably. That's why they have child suicide bombers.
Yes.
Yeah, you can trick children. And
Yeah.
It's understandable, though, that you would think somehow or another that other people would think that it's your fault. Or ignorant people would think, why didn't you know? Why didn't you leave? Or people
Right.
that, never really thought about it, never thought it through because they haven't had to.
Right.
You know?
The friends I went out with I'm calling them friends now, but I hadn't seen them since I was a little girl. They were saying, of course you would drink the Kool-Aid. And when people use that expression, I would have been first in line, would have signed up for that. We all would have, and I mean that. And I was born there and indoctrinated, and I would have completely taken anything that my grandfather or my parents told me was going to kill me. I would have felt that was going to take me to heaven quicker. And everyone I knew would have done that.
Wow.
And the reason you don't hear about a lot of cults, by the way, is because they didn't end up in flames or mass suicide. But that doesn't mean that they didn't prey on, dozens, sometimes hundreds or even thousands of people, depending on the cult.
I was talking to Mark Andreessen, and he was explaining to me that there's still many, many active cults in California.
Absolutely.
And I was like, what? Like right now? Like people know about them? Oh, yeah, they're successful. Like there's some successful cults.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, when I first
Is the field still around?
The field's still around. I've been told it is a completely different organization, and I'm not going to vouch one way or the other. They certainly don't have a charismatic leader like my grandfather once he died, and his replacement was there, and then once he died, I think it has not become secular. It's a very strong religious organization, but they don't have the control they used to. Because like when we were young, we didn't have social security number. There was no way to track things. And now, it's hard to get away with.
You have to pay taxes.
Yes, they do pay taxes. And there was a sexual abuse, case that was actually prosecuted. And I think after that, which I think was 2006, I think that they had to really clean up a lot of their practices.
When I'm hearing these stories about these boys and the abuse, that's what I'm thinking about. I'm thinking if there's a bunch of boys and no one's allowed to get married, that's not a good recipe.
No, it's not. And the particular one that got prosecuted was a young leader who was abusing 11 and 12-year-old boys sexually. I say out loud, I said this to my mom. I said, Mom, isn't it curious that no one's ever prosecuted anyone for what they did to girls? And I was a sexual abuse victim there, and it was something I was so ashamed of for so long. And anyway, but there's other forms of abuse that go on. I mean, there's obviously physical abuse, but there's a lot of psychological abuse. There's a lot of ways that it gets inside of you that you're worthless and that you can't trust yourself. And you can't even trust yourself with your own stories. Mm. And I have a slightly younger brother who adores you, by the way.
Tell me what's up. What's his name?
His name's Michael.
What's up, Michael?
Yeah. I love him to death. And he was raised, we were all raised collectively, but we were also raised separate from each other. And my biological siblings, we all had different experiences because they don't let you bond. They don't want my sister, who's just a little bit younger. She and I, we loved each other deeply, but we weren't allowed to speak to each other sometimes for weeks or months at a time.
Oh my God.
And they were just strongly against you forming what they would call allies. They didn't want friendships that could turn into anything that would be a little bit, probably culty, but no, like anything that would form a clique, they used to call it.
Right. But any other groups where another person could be in control.
Right.
Or they could discuss who's in control.
Yes. Or any loyalty to anyone else other than the primary leader.
Whew.
There's a lot of ways that you can indoctrinate people and make them police themselves.
Oh, yeah. That's what North Korea does.
Yeah.
North Korea gets everybody to rat on everybody else.
Oh, yeah. That was huge where I come from. I have, I felt like it was a huge compliment. One of the former members came out of the woodworks after this, and he said, I knew that you would never rat us out. And I was like, man, that's so great. But I mean, it was something we were all taught so deeply.
That you have to, no matter if this is your brother or your sister or your mom, you have to tell on them.
You have to, because you're worse.
That just keeps everybody scared all the time.
You never trust anyone.
God, it's so insidious and yet also brilliant. Like it's evil. It's evil, but how did he figure out how to do it? That's what's crazy. And how is he able to pull it off? That's what's always so fascinating to me, that it's not like children. With children, it just makes 100% sense. You're raised there. You think this is reality, and you think that the world outside reality is all a bunch of evil demons or whatever it is. But if you're an adult, like you're a grown adult, 34-year-old man, and you meet this dude at the auto repair shop, and he hands you a pamphlet, and the next thing you know, you're on a farm somewhere. Like, how do those people...
So I can't vouch to that. I will say that the unusual thing about the field is you have to join as a child. There are no adults who join.
Really?
It's kind of like a pyramid scheme. When you're most people join when they're 5 or 6, and they are indoctrinated, and then they play sports. Like, so for example, they play tackle football at age 5, and so they teach everyone how to, play a game, but it's only the people who are really good at the game that they continue to court, I would say. You could call them groom, whatever, but there's a lot more kids there than will ever get into the inner circles.